Hello, my name is Megan. I'm a medical student and I'm working with Wisconsin Voices for Recovery to bring you Saturday Night Chat. Saturday Night Chat is a monthly chat that creates a space for people to share their recovery journey and to show people in and seeking recovery that they are not alone and that recovery is possible. Today we will be hearing from Jackie. And Jackie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your recovery journey?
Sure, absolutely. My name's Jackie. I'm a family practice nurse practitioner and I work in the field of addiction medicine. My experience with addiction and recovery is a long one. I began in high school experimenting with marijuana and alcohol, drinking at parties, that kind of stuff. I drank and used in situations that were physically hazardous. I had wild underage drinking parties at my house. The Oneida County Sheriff's Department had my address on memorized. I never got really into any trouble in high school, so to speak, but my issues with my addiction began when I was exposed to prescription Adderall. A friend of mine gave me three 30 milligram extended release Adderall at a party my junior year of high school, and I was never the same. That drug made me think and feel that I had finally found what I was missing in my life. It gave me energy, it made me feel happy. It gave me the desire to be chatty and be, socially more loose. It allowed me to do really well in school, gave me energy to clean my room and organize and all that good stuff. And it was great until it wore off. So then I constantly was seeking after it, trying to find it. So I got a prescription for it. I manipulated my doctor into telling them that I had ADHD when I really didn't. And I, right out of the gates, began abusing it. The normal daily dose of Adderall is 30 to 60 milligrams. I was towards the end of my addiction. I was consuming up to 300 milligrams of Adderall, and I had a tremendous amount of side effects. I was anxious, delirious, having auditory hallucinations, sweating, and I basically couldn't function. I and when I had the medication, I thought I was good, and I was just this superhuman. And then when I didn't, I could barely get out of bed. I couldn't function. I was very depressed. I was explosive. I was painful to be around. And at a point, I realized that I had a problem with it. And I messaged my doctor and I said, look, I don't want you to write this medication anymore for me. I'm abusing it. And I was very honest and open with her about it. And she praised me for that. She retired. I got a new provider, and then I decided that, I can handle it again. I'll get the medication this time and I won't abuse it. And that lasted a couple hours. So I began abusing it. I would run out. Then I began stealing the medication from family members, from coworkers, and it was just a terrible way to live. And I decided I did not want to live like that anymore. So I made the choice to go to inpatient rehab at in Chandler Valley, Hope in Chandler, Arizona, for 30 days, and I've been clean ever since.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Can you talk about kind of that moment or point when you decided that it was time to seek recovery?
Yeah, and people that have used or struggle with addiction, they've been to this point where you can't get high anymore and you can't get clean. That's a really awful place to be because this pill, this drug, this is the one thing that's been our like saving grace. And when it stops working, even after like tremendously high doses, you feel very desperate and hopeless because now all the issues that you were struggling with that you were using this drug to help cover up, they're there permanently. And now you don't have an exit strategy anymore. So my mental health was a disaster. My physical health was awful, and I couldn't function anymore. So it was my only option. And I know a lot of people aren't in a position to go to treatment. I put my life on hold. I was working two jobs. I had my family. I made it a point to focus on myself. I have this phrase like in recovery, we have to come first, so everything in our life does not come last. So
Mhm.
it was a difficult decision, but it was one that I feel was necessary for me.
Yeah. Yeah, and you bring up that point of, when you stop using that, then reveal all of those underlying issues that you were kind of covering up. Can you kind of talk about what that's like in the process of recovery?
Absolutely. there's this phrase, the addiction is not the problem. It's the attempted solution to the problem, whether it's trauma, depression, anxiety, emotional pain. For a while, the drugs do a really, really good job of numbing that, right? Because we're not in a position to deal with it. It's just too much. We can't do it. So here's this Band-Aid, but the Band-Aid falls off. And then the wound that we tried to cover up is worse than it was before. So in recovery, we need to understand that once the drug and the alcohol or whatever it is gone, we still have to deal with ourselves. And that's a full-time 24/7, constant process that we have to work through. And that's why the 12 steps of recovery are super important. For me, I have a sponsor. I go to meetings. I read the big book of AA and NA, and I redo my step work all the time because we have defects as humans, right? Our instincts, they can be mismatched and how do I want to say this? Our instincts for food and shelter and longing and all those things, but once they're thwarted with drugs, they become abnormal. So it's just understanding why we have the issues that we have is super important to kind of explore. And that's why the 12 steps are super important. And we have to look back at the harms that we've done to others. Step one is realizing that we're powerless over this addiction and that our lives have become unmanageable. Why was it unmanageable? What was going on? And so it's a big exploration into ourselves, the harms we've done to ourselves and the harms that we've done to other people. So as you go through the steps, you have to look back at that painful past and realize, oh my gosh. And individually, this is very much a step working process. You have to write down every bad thing you've done to every person. You write it out and you write, and the harm that they've done to you, you've done to them, and in your ownership percentage in that. Yeah, they screwed me over this way, but this was my part in it. And then you have to go to each of those people and make an amends to them and apologize, whether you stole from them or, had an outburst or whatever. And I had to do a lot of that with my family with regards to my behavior because I was very mentally unstable for a long time. And sometimes they accept your amends and things move on and repair themselves, and sometimes they don't. And that process is very, very painful, and it can be isolating. And then if you don't manage that shame, like an untreated, undealt with resentment is the number one thing that will cause an addict to relapse. So that's why it's important to have really, really strong social support. And I get that in my recovery community with my home group, and prayer and meditation and having a higher power is pivotal. And a lot of people in addiction or in recovery with addiction issues struggle with having a higher power, like the God thing. It doesn't have to be God. It doesn't have to be Christ. It's just something bigger than you to draw strength from. And that's very, very important.
Yeah, I think you highlighted a lot of super important things with that response, like that that it isn't necessarily the substance that's the problem, it's those underlying things, and that is the important piece to kind of continuously work on,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
identify for each individual, which I think that is like something that I think not everybody realizes always.
Right. Because
Yeah.
addiction is very much a chronic illness. It's relapsing and remitting, and we'll have this forever. Like I will always identify as a drug addict. I sometimes don't like to, but it's kind of like if somebody has diabetes or high blood pressure, you go to the doctor, your blood pressures are high, they give you a medication, your blood pressure is controlled, you're still high, you still have the disease of hypertension, or your blood sugars are good, you're still diabetic. So I will always be a drug addict. I will always have that disease. And the disease wants us to be miserable. It wants us to go back out there and use. So I have to fight it every day, every minute, of every second, of every hour, every day. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Yeah, you highlighted some of the really challenging pieces of recovery and how it is this ongoing, pretty challenging process. Like you said, can be isolating and things like that. Can you kind of talk about, how you found a community to help you get through it, and just kind of what are those strategies that you have for when it does get really hard? Because like you said, it is an ongoing thing that you're constantly working towards.
Yeah. Yeah, when I was in treatment, we walked through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and we have H&I, which is called hospitals and institutions, where people from outside organizations would come in and hold meetings for us. So before I left treatment, I got a sponsor, which I think is super important. A lot of people don't do that. And then they're home and then they're already kind of behind the eight ball. So I started looking up local AA and NA meetings in my area, and I started going. I still go to about three meetings a week. And when you go to an AA meeting or an NA meeting for the first time, you're the newcomer, and the newcomer is the most important person in any meeting. And usually the ladies, if it's a female person, the ladies will go around and they'll send a phone list around and they sign their name and their phone number, and you can reach out to them. And for men, the men will give each other their phone numbers. And so as going through meetings, my phone list grew, and I have a group text with probably about 30 ladies that are in my community, and we go to meetings together, and it's just awesome. If I'm having a bad day or thinking about using or thinking about throwing it all away, I just text somebody and I'm like, hey, I feel like crap. They're like, pause when agitated. Let's read a little bit. Let's pray about it. It's a pretty cool thing to have people available to you, because when we're using, we often surround ourselves with people that use like us, or we'll go to the bar and we'll drink, and those aren't righteous friendships by any means. And when you get clean, those friendships go away. And often you're left with just yourself because your family doesn't understand. You feel kind of ostracized. So it's absolutely pivotal to have that recovery family. And that's the family we get to choose, right? Because sometimes the family we're born with doesn't understand. And me, in treating patients with addiction, a lot of their family members don't understand. I provide medication assisted treatment with methadone and Suboxone for patients with opiate use disorder, and a lot of their parents and older family members think it's just substituting one drug for another, and that could not be more false. So we have enough to deal with ourselves, with our own thinking, let alone that incessant negative chirping from family they don't understand. So then they get stuck. So whenever sobriety is one of the things that we get to keep by giving it away. So I use my experience in my practice to help patients in those situations. Like, look, your family may never come around, and that's really crappy, but you need to put yourself first, so everything in your life does not come last. And that can be very isolating, but that's why it's important to have that recovery support available.
Yeah, that sounds extremely powerful, having, people to go to who understand what you're going through because they've gone through or are going through the exact same thing. And like you said, they're on, their values seem to align with yours as well. You're not
Right.
compared to when you are using and you're around people who kind of maybe don't align with your values. But that sounds really powerful, having those
Right.
people to turn to, and they kind of, know what to say and how to help. And I think that's super helpful. You mentioned that you work in addiction medicine. Can you talk about kind of what your experience has been, having experienced addiction yourself and then working in addiction medicine?
Yeah. It's kind of like an optimal fit for me. It takes one to know one, so to speak. So I have a patient that's coming in and they're going through exactly what I went through when I was struggling with all that stuff. I know exactly what to say. I know exactly what they're going through. And I have the tools and I have the experience, strength, and hope that they need in that moment. And it's very valuable. Our relationships get really, really strong. And, it's different when if you're in that situation and you're being talked to by somebody that doesn't have the disease of addiction. It's kind of like, well, what do you know about what I'm going through? So it's a very natural fit for me. I honestly feel that all the bad things in my life and the negative experiences led me to be in this position right now to help people. And I think that's very much a God thing, because when you're in that moment and you're struggling and you're depressed and you want to die, like, what is the purpose of this? How much longer can I keep, but you just keep going and you keep pushing, and one day at a time. And then kind of like this grand plan is revealed. And yeah, I've experience in emergency medicine, critical care, interventional cardiology, trauma. All those things have enabled me to just be this well-rounded provider in this scope that I'm in right now. And yeah, my patients do really, really well if they want to recover. And that's the thing, like, you can't force somebody to get clean. Like those intervention shows, are very entertaining, but it's unrealistic. Like you can't hog tie somebody and throw them into treatment and want it. No one's going to stop until they've had enough,
Right.
until they want recovery. And that's really important to remember if you're a family member or a friend that has somebody that's struggling with this. You can tell them your concerns. You can tell them how much they're hurting you in the family, but they're not going to stop until they're ready. And that's why Al-Anon is really, really important. It's a resource for people that have family members or loved ones with the disease of alcoholism or addiction, because you have to have those boundaries. Because an addict that's using can be very, very draining, and it's important to keep yourself healthy and have those healthy boundaries for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense that, having had the experience yourself, that I feel like that makes you that much more like credible and able to build that kind of rapport and trust, I'm sure, with patients because you get it. And I think that's super powerful and I think that, like you said, being able to find kind of meaning and purpose in that is really incredible too.
Yeah, and it's a blessing to be able to work where I work with my history and my past, because a lot of my friends that are in AA or NA, they can't let anybody find out that they go to those meetings, and that's where that stigma and that shame comes in, where my boss, my patients, they know I'm a drug addict, they know I'm in recovery, so I don't have to hide that. It's almost like a badge of honor. In a way, it should almost be like a prerequisite to work in addiction to have it on your resume. But unfortunately, a lot of people their jobs aren't really understanding or supportive, so they have to keep that hidden. And I'm fortunate that I don't have to, so I kind of wear it, like I said, as a badge of honor, and I practice what I preach.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. And then I know before this, we kind of talked a little bit, and you mentioned that you also do some outreach work with high schools. And can you talk about what you do there?
Yeah, so I go into the local high schools. It's been like health classes, or there were some sophomore, junior classes that um, they have a desire to go into like health sciences, like in careers in medicine and stuff. And I share my story. It's like a 45-minute chat. I explain what my life was like then, what it's like now, and I really emphasize the importance of safety with these young kids, and the importance of understanding harm reduction, overdose prevention, because kids nowadays can get drugs on the internet, with TikTok, and you can order drugs online, and you think you may be getting Adderall or Xanax when it's actually all laced with fentanyl. They're putting fentanyl and xylazine and all these crazy pharmaceutical compounds in gummies and candies. It's like the wild, wild west out there. So I give a very frank, very riveting talk about how dangerous this is. This is not a game. It's not a joke. How do I say this? Every pill you take, every mistake you make could be the last decision you ever make. So it's yeah, and I have a lot of engagement with the kids. On my last talk, two kids that wanted to go into medical school after high school stayed at and chatted with me for like 45 minutes. One gal, she was 17. She tells me that the kids are bringing bongs and they're smoking weed in the bathroom, and she's actually an alcoholic. She comes to work or to school drunk every single day, and it's like these kids are so young, and it seems like it's happening earlier and earlier in life with the impact of social media. So I really want to get out there in the community as like a grassroots approach, and just explain that they're not alone. There's options for treatment, and it may not be them that has the issue. It could be a family member, a parent, grandparent, aunt, or uncle, and just help guide them to the support that they need for them to deal with that.
Yeah, that's really incredible work and really important work. I think, like you said, the accessibility is so much higher now with the internet and social media and things like that, but the education might not have necessarily caught up with that. So I think, yeah, you going out and just educating these kids on what the dangers kind of are, and then also sharing your story. You talked about how you started with kind of like drinking in high school and things like that. So just showing like kind of how that it might not stop once you leave high school and things like that too. So
Right. And I
yeah.
really highlight the whole concept of the gateway drug. A lot of people think
Mhm.
alcohol and marijuana are not gateway drugs, and they most certainly are,
Mhm.
100%. So,
For sure. Yeah, and you kind of talked about too when we talked before this, that there's kind of differences in views on different substances too, on like how alcohol is a little bit more socially acceptable
mhm.
than maybe pills. And can you kind of talk about that and your experience in
Yeah, absolutely. So, alcohol, we're Wisconsin, we're
Mhm.
a drinking state with a beer problem, right? People think it's funny and you can get alcohol everywhere, but alcohol causes a lot of problems for a lot of families. But it's socially acceptable because it's everywhere. It's ingrained in our culture. Where if you have a pill addiction like I did, it's somehow stigmatized and you're looked at different. Like, okay, well, what's the difference? I'm taking a couple of these pills and you're getting loaded drinking a 12 pack. It's still a drug. It's still an addiction, but alcoholism is way more accepted. And I feel like that's where a lot of people get into issues where they may not want to share about because there's a ton of shame with it. So it's um like for me, being a drug addict, it's a little bit different than being an alcoholic. It's still an addiction, but I still carry a lot of shame with that. My family doesn't really understand, even though a lot of my family members are alcoholics. It's different, and like um my mom suffers from alcoholism and she had some bad health effects from that last year, and the family was very hush hush, like we don't talk about it. We're just not going to talk about that. It's like, why? It's ingrained in our culture that alcohol is okay but pills are not okay. So it's just understanding that stigma is always going to be there, I think, is important. And I don't fit the typical picture of a drug addict. I was never on Skid Row. I never lost my job or my family or went to jail. A lot of that's common for a lot of people in recovery, but the disease wants us dead, but it'll settle for miserable, and it'll come after. And it doesn't have to be pills. It could be anything. It could be from gambling or shopping or porn. You name it. Anytime we find something that temporarily makes us feel better, we're going to keep going back to that as that improper coping mechanism. So.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that um one of the goals of these chats and Wisconsin Voices for Recovery is kind of trying to work on breaking down that stigma. And I think, you know, kind of talking about that and realizing that, just because people have a certain idea of what addiction looks like, that's not always how it is. There's these stereotypes that not everybody fits that mold. And
Mm-hmm.
also that point that, we've kind of normalized alcohol as, that's not addiction or that's not the same as other substances, but it certainly can be. It is still kind of that
Oh,
same
yeah.
disease. So,
Yeah. Like you go to any event in Wisconsin, there's alcohol there, whether it's,
mm,
football parties or, excuse me, birthdays, baby showers. And then once you get clean and you're able to, it's like, gosh, there's alcohol everywhere. Or you're just going over to visit a friend and there's wine automatically. It's just like that can be very triggering for somebody that's early in recovery. And then you get that curious mental twist. It's like, okay, well, my addiction, I wasn't addicted to alcohol. Can I have some alcohol? That it's like, no, for me, I have to have full abstinence, any mind altering substance. Some people in like AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, may still smoke weed or may do whatever, and that's their choice. Everybody has their individual program of recovery. It's important to focus on ourselves and just we clean up our side of the street and stay in our lane. Whatever anybody else wants to do, that's what they want to do. But for me, I don't do anything, and that's the way it's got to be for me.
yeah, and I
Because
think,
when we use drugs or substitute one drug for another, we release the addiction all over again. And alcohol, 100% is a drug, no doubt.
yeah. And I think that highlights another important point too, that, everybody's journey and experience is individual and that, you have to do what makes the most sense for you. And you really have to I think what it keeps coming back to is work on yourself and your own individual problems and experiences. And I think, yeah, that really highlights that. Yeah. So, what are some some tips that you would have or things that you think would be important for people who are working towards recovery to know?
That you're not alone. That's the big thing. Um, the disease wants us alone, wants us miserable. And that's very much that self-talk that we have to start breaking apart. Talk to your doctor, talk to your counselor, talk to your, if you're in high school, your police liaison officer. And it's just getting those tools in place to make a decision, to make a plan of care, a program of recovery. Okay, this is what I'm doing. This is what I don't want to do anymore. And then just insulating yourself with tools and services that can help you accomplish those goals. Like for me, inpatient rehab, I needed to do. Some people don't need to do that, and if not, great. But not having that negative self-talk, ignoring the stigma, and just getting healthy. So being honest with your doctors is super important. If you're abusing a medication or if you're getting a medication, mixing alcohol with it, you have to be honest with your doctor. They're there to help. They're not there to shame you. Unfortunately, though, there is some stigma built into the medical community. A lot of old school doctors don't really understand, and if you're not getting the care you need with that doctor, get a new one. And be honest with the people in your life. Be honest with your partner and your family, and just get the help that you need, one step at a time, one day at a time.
Yeah, I think that that's super helpful. Like I just talked about, it is everyone has their own individual experience, but that doesn't mean that you have to face it alone. And there are
Exactly.
people who understand it and are there to help too, which is really important to
Mhm.
know.
And that's one of the reasons we start using in the beginning. For me, I was alone. I felt isolated. I was always made to feel like the black sheep. And, you come across this drug or this medication and it makes you feel better. But that only lasts for so long. And then you still have to deal with yourself. So I'm a really big proponent of AA, NA, the 12 steps of recovery, finding a higher power, having faith in that is very, very important.
Yeah, and you talked about a little bit um how, this isn't easy to do. It's can be really challenging and it's ongoing, something you have to continually work on. And sometimes it can be really isolating, sometimes your family won't get it, things like that. How do you continue to work on it when it gets really hard? Like, what makes it feel worth it, I guess?
Good question. So, keep coming back, keep going to meetings, keep getting phone numbers, and get involved in service, whether that's pouring coffee at a meeting or setting up chairs or sitting and talking to somebody that's struggling. That that selfless those selfless acts of service is what makes us feel better. And um, just figuring out what you want. Like if you don't ever want to have to use again, you don't have to use again. But it's all about putting those tools in place so you can get your emotional needs met, your psychosocial needs met, working on your health, all those things, and just being around positive people that make you feel good. Because that's what's hard. Like a lot of times, our family or our friend group doesn't understand, and that you can still love those people, but for a while you have to love them from a distance, and then slowly, as you get stronger, you can start incorporating it. Like for me, I went out with a couple last night and they use drugs and it's very uncomfortable for me to be around people like that. So it's for a while you have to kind of put yourself in this recovery bubble until you're strong enough to deal with life on life's terms. So it's yeah, you got to take it one day at a time and get that support, and that support is there in those meetings for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, that really highlights, I think, what you said before of like, you really have to put yourself first.
Mhm.
Um, and sometimes maybe that means putting certain things on hold or not seeing certain people if that is what's best for you. But I think that's a really good point.
Mhm.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to make sure that, you know, people know that from your journey or just any kind of final remarks that you have?
Um, recovery is amazing. How I feel now is what I was after when I was using. The peace of mind, the serenity, being able to sleep, being able to interact, being able to go to work and function and take it. Like I'm a much better parent now. I have an excellent relationship with my daughter. I didn't lose her through the course of my addiction. Thank God. I was always there, but I was absent-minded, of course, because I was under the influence. But every relationship gets better. Everything in life gets better. But that's not to say that we don't have hard days and rough days and setbacks. But recovery is possible. You very much deserve it, and you can do it one day at a time. And um, yeah, it's amazing.
That is so, so powerful that, like you said, what you were kind of chasing with an addiction
Mhm.
is what you found in recovery. And I think
Yeah.
that's incredible to hear, especially because I mean we talked about how challenging this can be, but just
Mhm.
knowing that there is this reward at the end and
Yeah. Yeah.
there is a bright light.
Yeah. Because for me, I used to feel normal. I
Mhm.
used to be like everybody else. Like, oh, this gal, she's so happy and she's so skinny and she's got so much energy. I need to use to be like that. And it's like I tried that and it doesn't work.
Mhm.
Now I'm clean and I'm sober and I am the person that I wanted to be back then. But it takes a tremendous amount of work, self exploration, a ton of discipline. Because if you stop working the program, the disease wins. Because we have this phrase: when you're inside a meeting, your addiction's out in the parking lot doing push-ups. So
Mhm.
it's like keeping a lion locked in a cage type of thing. And the more you work on yourself and build your self-esteem and build those positive core values, it's just you're more safe, on a day-to-day basis. But relapse is a part of a lot of people's story. It's not part of mine, and I will never use drugs again. But that's not to say that I don't think about it. I think about it a lot, but then I also think about what I would be losing, and I'm not willing to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much, Jackie, for sharing your story. It was really incredible. I know I learned a lot from chatting with you, and I really think that your story is super powerful and you have a lot of really great advice and things to say. So thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for
It's
chatting.
my pleasure.